All right. Hopefully we have sound. Greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News. If everything sounds okay, give me a thumbs up. Or give me a sounds good or something like that. Oh, I see. Yeah, I think everything is fine. Anyways, welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for hanging out. We're live on Rockfin. Got crackly audio. Okay. That is just a feature, not a bug, but a feature. Thanks for letting me know. I can't really help that. That's a StreamYard something. I don't know what it is. But anyways, we're live on Rockfinners. How you doing? Good to see you. Okay. Colliners. Don't know where the call-in people are yet. I'm sure they'll show up eventually. All right. Hope you all enjoyed your Labor Day. I don't know if you did anything fun. Yes, it is it's much cooler today. Man, it's nice. Feels like fall is setting in. And I'm so happy not to be sweating it out and having my brain melt every single day. Anyways, we're just going to try and get through a couple of articles today. That was my plan for today. My big plan. And, but first of all, we'll start with couple of posts about what's going on in the world of the wild world of weather. And this seems to be all summer long. It's just been craziness, right? We've seen from an average, 1.5 C above average in June, globally, to just massive floods, massive drought, massive heat waves. It just has never let up. This entire summer has been one weather extreme after another. And we can only, hope. Yes, I hope that it doesn't just get continually worse, but we know this is kind of the trend line that we're on. So though we hope for things to somehow get back to normal, the reality is that they will probably just continue to, unravel. Sometimes, faster, sometimes slower. Things will just unravel and become more chaotic. The weather will become more chaotic, and that leads to all kinds of problems. Anyways, from Poppy. Incredible rain amounts headed for Greece. Massive flooding expected. Crazy. This model shows 80 inches of rain for Greece in the next 3 days. 80 inches. One model shows 95. Plus 95 inches. Good Lord. Good Lord. But they are getting it. So here's George Sakraclides, one of Greece's most iconic mountain resorts. Makronitsa. Devastated by Storm Daniel a few hours ago. Houses literally tumbling down the hill. Dead and missing reported. And there's more. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. More from Greece, more from Sri Lanka. I think also Brazil getting in there with their flooding, their own flooding programs. This is more on Greece. It sunsets on Skiathos, Greece. It has rained nonstop all day. Streets are flooded. Heartbreaking. Let's see. This is Brazil. Also having their own massive floods due to heavy rains in Nova Bassano. Brazil. Nova Bassano of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. And let's see. And then we'll show Sri Lanka also getting whacked by flooding. Massive floods due to heavy rains in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Look at that. Everything's floating away. Man. It's rough. All right, I want to read this article from same fellow that I read last week. And he has another article out. Good synopsis. He's got good takes on the climate change. And give me 1 second while I get into it. These articles are a little bit longer, so I'm going to try to read this one quickly. The name of the writer is Indrajit Samarajiva, or Inda.ca or Indica. It's titled, "It's Too Late, Baby." As Renee Churches writes on Medium, it's too late to fight climate change itself, an oxymoron. Climate change is just one of many exponential problems caused by exponential growth. Ooh, good point, right? He's pointing out that climate change is not, the discussion or the argument around climate change. Is it real? Is it not? Who cares? Whatever. Maybe it's happening. God's got this or something. Climate change itself is probably the wrong discussion, because climate change is just one aspect or an outgrowth of exponential growth. Yes, I know it's very anti-human to say there's too many people doing too many things. It's not necessarily anti-human. I mean, that's what people want to say to get you to stop thinking about it or not have a conversation about it. It's not anti-human to say that. You know, to say like, well, the deer are overrunning Yellowstone Park. That's not anti-deer. You're just stating a fact that's, backed up by science and data and numbers, right? It's just, these are just data points. But the conversation around it is supposed to get you to not look at it, to have an emotional reaction to it, to not think about it, to not consider it, to not talk it out with people. To say, super scientific things like, that's stupid. Anyways, climate change is just one of many exponential problems caused by exponential growth, and you simply don't have much time before exponential processes get out of control, and that time has simply gone. We have had warnings for hundreds of years, for decades, and what we're seeing now are not warnings, they are the cascading effects already begun. Humanity and our greed incarnate, corporations never stopped hitting the gas. We never reduced artificial growth and never stopped polluting. As Malcolm X said, you don't stick a knife in a man's back 9 inches and then pull it out 6 inches and say, you're making progress. It's even worse than what Brother Malik said, because all we've done is stick the knife in another 9 inches. Put a bamboo handle on it and call it renewable. Right. As I've said before, we are not even the operant species. During the colonial era, some dickheads programmed corporations with the imperative to keep growing, taking slaves and land wherever it went. And now this legally recognized AI has gotten predictably out of control and devoured the world. We're at the tail end of this process that devoured countries like mine centuries ago. And the people that pollute the most are trying to bargain now that it's come for them too. It's too little too late. We had ethics homework due 400 years ago and failed that. Then physics homework due 50 years ago and failed that. And there's no extensions no more. People say this is defeatism, but it's not defeatism if you actually lose. As Renee Churches says, we've already lost the climate battle, and it is stories or opinions like Rebecca Solnitz, I don't know who that is, that are preventing others from grasping this. I'm assuming she's a techno-optimist. And stopping us from taking the kinds of collective adaptive responses appropriate on a local and global scale. The not too late framing is a dangerous one. It means people are prepared to wait for global elites to roll out energy transition, to deploy such solutions as carbon capture technologies or other flawed techno-fixes aimed at making those elites wealthy while not stopping the baked-in warming that is already here and accelerating. It is only when we finally break through the not too late taboo that we will begin to work in earnest of adaptation to reduce suffering as much as we can. Somehow, we struggle to understand at scale what happens in our own lives every day. Sometimes you are just too late. You miss the train. You lose the girl, boy. Someone dies and you can only visit the grave. In more mundane ways, the cake gets burnt. You miss a deadline. Hell, the tea gets cold. Entropy's a one-way street and we're whizzing down it every day. We all know this on a personal level. It shouldn't be so hard to understand in the aggregate, and yet hope springs eternal. What's different with climate change is that it's an exponential process, which is legitimately hard to understand. We just don't understand exponential processes because we rarely encounter them. Walls don't start speeding up as you get closer to them, but we have encountered them recently, which should give you a clue as to how effed we are. COVID-19 was an example of exponential growth where something tiny, a few dozen cases, suddenly became huge overnight. I don't necessarily agree with his take on COVID, by the way. I'm just saying that. Whatever. I'm reading the article, but I don't want to go off on a tangent. While China and many of its neighbors and even small African and Caribbean countries responded quickly and firmly, I don't understand that one. which is what you have to do with exponential threats. The white empire under America responded with denial, blame, bargaining, value signaling bullshit, profiteering, and then back to denial again. They offered too little too late and got swamped with that exponential growth, which was really just a dress rehearsal for climate collapse. Even if we had gotten the message from COVID-19, it would still be too late. When something is doubling, you can go from half fucked to completely fucked in one cycle. And our civilization has been doubling in wastes and tastes every 35 or so years. By 2020, the problem was so far gone that we would have had to stay locked in. We would have had to stay locked down. On this, I agree with. The problem was so far gone that we would have had to stay locked down. That's the scale of sacrifice required, and nobody's even considering that. I'm going to have to say yes to that. As much as people didn't like, resisted, and on some levels, I didn't like it either. On some levels, didn't like the, authoritarian control of lockdowns, and I get that. I understand that. If you're talking about climate change and the damage we're doing to the planet, we should have stayed our butts locked down. Lockdown was the best thing ever for the planet. If we're talking about the planet, might be uncomfortable for humans, and humans didn't like it. But, sometimes it's so sad, too bad. Humans don't get. We're like 5-year-old children who don't get what we want immediately, or we don't get the candy that we were promised, or whatever. Anyways, we would have had to have stayed locked down. That's the scale of sacrifice required. Nobody's even considering that. The time to act was at best 2 or 3 doublings ago. It's simply far too late now, and we're just fucked. It's not like we weren't told. 400 years ago, I could go back to the axial age 2,500 years ago, but to be specific, I'll go back to the first corporations, what I call a species of artificial intelligence. The first joint stock companies were formed in the 1600s, and they were programmed to grow at all costs by raping the world. What were these golems unleashed on? The entire global south, which was devoured for natural resources and slaves, using renewable energy at first, in case you thought that was the problem. This was the beginning of exponential growth that should have been nipped in the bud then if we were to have a real chance. While indigenous people resisted and were also divided and conquered, there was also resistance from within the seat of white empire at the time, England. When the South Sea bubble burst in 1720 during a plague, because the gods do try to tell us, the directors of the South Sea Company were called before Parliament, where they were fined, and some of them jailed for notorious fraud and breach of trust. Though one parliamentarian demanded they be sewn up in sacks along with snakes and monies, and then drowned, they were, for the most part, spared harsh punishment. As for the corporation itself, in 1720, Parliament passed the Bubble Act, which made it a criminal offense to create a company presuming to be a corporate body and to issue transferable stocks without legal authority. Corporations were effectively banned after that collapse of stock jobbery, but the act had loopholes you could sail a slave ship through. Still admirable compared to today, with the idea of banning or even slightly reining in corporations is unthinkable. It's unthinkable. Again, this is the thing that we have to do. I've said this millions of times, and people, might agree with me or might go, what the hell are you talking about? No, yes, when Klaus Schwab says, well, corporations are going to, help steer the globe in the right direction. No, corporations are not the people you want to trust. Corporations are not even the things you want around. You want to gather them up in a ball and light them on fire or something. Throw them in a pit. Throw them in the ocean. Something. They need to go away. The only political answer to this is if somebody gets into office, takes over all corporations and shuts them down immediately. That would be the first thing you would need to do. And we're not even close to having that conversation, and some people can't even, fathom thinking about that. even while they're outlining how bad corporations have been, corporations and moneyed entities have been, through the last several centuries, how they have done us wrong and done us dirty. They still don't understand these things need to be shut down, cast aside. Anyways. The programmatic wickedness and irresponsibility of limited liability companies was hotly debated once, not the least by the people in their mouth. Now we're just left with the consequences, and it's just hot. Now corporations are running the place, and we're mere bystanders ruled by AI without even knowing it. Now the colonial chickens have come home to roost, and the planet-devouring programs have quite predictably devoured the planet. Left unchecked, exponential growth on a finite planet can have only one result. The resources run out, the petri dish overflows with waste, things fall apart. So here we are. Now, I understand that this is a novel argument, so please understand that 400 years ago was not the only warning. If you insist on following the vainglorious science that got us into this predicament, yes, the vainglorious science. A book called The Limits of Growth put the ethical failings of colonial capitalism into scientific terms 50 years ago. 50 years ago, in 1972, The Limits to Growth was published. It described how the doubling time of our wastes and tastes was dramatically speeding up, and how we were completely fucked if we didn't act soon. They wrote, the exponential growth curve of world population is shown in Figure 5. Here we are. And we're above this, by the way. way above this, right? You need to add a couple more blocks to this chart to get to where we are. That's how way above that we are. They wrote, the exponential growth curve of what world population is shown in Figure 5. In 1650, the population numbered about 0.5 billion, and it was growing at a rate of approximately 0.3% per year. That corresponds to a doubling time of nearly 250 years. In 1970, the population totaled 3.6 billion, and the rate of growth was 2.1% per year. The doubling time at this growth rate is 33 years. Thus, not only has the population been growing exponentially, but the rate of growth has also been growing. We might say that population growth has been super exponential. The population curve is rising even faster than it would if growth were strictly exponential. The Club of Rome, the joint authors of the book, did mathematical projections of future growth and resource use and concluded that if the present growth trends in world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. The most probable result will be a rather sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity. I have bolded the whole thing because, hot damn, they said it, and we're in it right now. The Club of Rome plotted out predications, which were meant to be taken as trend lines, not specific years, which nonetheless have, as a 2009 follow-up in American Scientist notes, proved remarkably accurate. As those authors wrote, although we do not necessarily advocate that the existing structure of this limits to growth model is adequate for the task to which it is put, it is important to recognize that its predictions have not been invalidated and in fact seem quite on target. We are not aware of any model made by economists that is as accurate over such a long time span. Despite how prescient limits of growth was and how sadly relevant it still is, you can barely find a copy these days. I can't even find an EPUB of the book. Yeah, wow, must be a, super secret plan, right? Super horrible plan that they're unleashing on us, this limits to growth. Can't even find it anywhere. Excuse me. Meanwhile, the old colonial scammers still have run of the land, moving onto their latest scam, which is green growth, as if painting your tumor a different color makes a difference. The Club of Rome wrote the limits of to growth still in the time of fucking around, but now we are solidly in the time of finding out. And what did they predict for now? Well, have a look either outside or at the chart. It's not good. Interestingly, everything down except for deaths and births. So there will be more babies born, but more people will die, and that will result in the population going down. Do you think talking about this is anti-human, or do you think living through it is anti-human? Or do you think not talking about it is anti-human? Just letting it unfold the way it's going to unfold. Is that anti-human? Just a question. Do you think having a conversation is more intelligent, or telling everybody it's crazy to have a conversation about this is more intelligent? I don't know. Just a question. If everybody that you're listening to for the truth tells you that anybody talking about this or anybody linked in any way to this conversation is a insane, anti-human, depopulation agenda, lunatic, is that message a real message? Or is it a true message? Or is it the message of the people that want everything to keep going until you hit the wall? Just a question. Does it serve them for you to keep going and going and going until you hit the wall without having this conversation? Because God forbid anybody have a conversation about degrowth or stopping doing what we're doing or not hitting the wall or slowing down before we hit the wall. God forbid we have a conversation about that. This is a reformatted version of the limits of growth graph. The original authors did not include date markers besides 1900 and 2100 on purpose. However, as the American Scientist authors say, this model ended up being more numerically accurate than anything made by vulgar economists who can't predict shit and keep failing upwards. And oh boy, is a crash coming, crashing straight through imaginary economics, ding, into science, ding, and straight through to the real world. Wow. That is an amazing sentence. I could spend a lot of time just breaking down that sentence, but I won't. As you can see, it's way too late to do anything now. Hell, it was nearing too late at the time the Limits of Growth was published. Even that was a last chance, which got buried in a haze of 1980s oil drilling and cocaine. As the Secretary General of the UN, U Thant, said in 1969, I do not wish to seem overdramatic, but I can only conclude from the information that is available to me as Secretary General that the members of the United Nations have perhaps 10 years left in which to subordinate their ancient quarrels and launch a global partnership to curb the arms race, to improve the human environment, to defuse the population explosion, and to supply the required momentum of development efforts. Wow. If such a global partnership is not forged within the next decade, then I very much fear that the problems I have mentioned will have reached such staggering proportions that they will be beyond our capacity to control. Well, this was such an evil, plan 50 years ago, but what happened? None of those things happened. We didn't control the arms race. We didn't control, runaway population control. We didn't control the use of the overuse of resources. We didn't control emissions. We didn't do anything. So if this is such a big evil plot, like, where are the results of the plot? I don't even see it. And guess what? Population's still going up. So like, there is not a depopulation agenda if population's still going up. I don't know what you're talking about. You lost me there. None of the stuff U Thant was calling for happened. And so, as warned, the problems mentioned have reached such staggering proportions that they are beyond our capacity to control. Warnings from the past are the epitaphs of the future, which is why it's so chilling to read them now. 10 years after Uthant's warning, the globe did seemingly crash with the oil crisis, but the response to that was to drill more oil, continue quarreling, and desperately double down on the doubling that was leading us straight to our doom. And so here we are, nearly 2 doubling cycles later, completely screwed. Today, what we call warning signs today are mislabeled. Getting a climate warning today is like seeing a stop sign on your windshield as you crash through it. Correct, I guess, but helpful, no. We are in no position to stop, delay, or even meaningfully slow down what's happening. People say this is defeatism, and yeah, sometimes you're just defeated. What's more intelligent, continuing to waste resources and die in a lost cause, or surrender and recover what you can, saving as many lives as possible? Instead, people are being sold the false hope that some magical technology will solve the problems of technology, so keep buying. Their answer to crashing through stop signs is to put a TV in the car, make it self-driving, and telling the people to relax and enjoy themselves. It's bullshit. No amount of optimism and motivation can turn back time or reverse entropy. We all know this from our personal lives. We should know it from COVID. Why do we miss the point on climate? I understand not wanting to lose, but denial isn't the same thing as winning. Sometimes you just lose. People say that admitting defeat means no one will be motivated to do anything. But this is what people are doing anyways. In fact, the false hope continues the degradation and fucking decadence even more. People really think they can solve this problem by buying the right shoes or solar panels or magical carbon credits. Never mind that all renewable energy is produced with fossil fuels and that the resources it consumes are not renewable, certainly not at the scale we propose using them. At this point, we should be marshaling our resources for the undignified crash we're heading to, not putting TV screens in electric cars. Yet here we are. As Renee writes, the obsession with net zero is ironically also wasting huge amounts of precious remaining fossil fuels that we will need for climate adaptation, to respond to natural disasters, to save crops, to move entire communities, to accommodate refugees. The energy-intensive mining to procure precious earth metals for renewable technologies is destroying remaining habitat for wildlife and indigenous peoples in many places around the globe. It is the last desperate grasp for wealth and power by global elites that they don't care about our survival or the earth and its creatures. They just want to retain their wealth and power above all else for as long as possible. Ding, 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 ding. This is their ticket to do it. Greenwashing is the norm. The sad fact is that in a lot of wars, especially World War II, most people are killed after the war has, historically speaking, been lost. The Germans effectively lost after Stalingrad and were retreating ever since, but they lost the most casualties after that. Oh, yes. And good God. Big Surge writes, the inevitability of German defeat was certainly a reality, but the war was anything but over. In fact, 1944 and 45 formed the bloodiest and most cataclysmic years of the war by far. The Wehrmacht was losing the war, to be sure, but it still maintained millions of men in the field. We can win this, guys, and it increasingly propped itself up by mobilizing volunteers from around Europe. In its dying death rage, as it vainly protested its own Götterdämmerung, I don't know how to pronounce that, the Wehrmacht would both kill and die in astonishing numbers. By November 1943, after over 1,500 days of war, total Wehrmacht permanent casualties, dead, disabled, or missing, amounted to roughly 3 million men. This makes for a loss rate of just under 2,000 men per day for over 4 years. From November 1943 through the end of the war in May 1945, a span of 527 days, Wehrmacht losses would be some 5 million men. Thus, over the final 18 months of the war, German losses were an astonishing 9,400 per day, and although this closing phase made up only a quarter of the war in chronological terms, it accounted for nearly 2/3 of Germany's total combat losses. Hitler didn't describe to defeatism, but what did that get the Germans? Even more dead than they would be otherwise, and their lands completely decimated. Given that we're fighting a force of nature, admitting defeat and surrendering the whole warlike metaphor is the best result we can hope for. Yes, good God. Good God, yes. Just stop already. Shit, what do I do? At this point, people often ask me what should I do, and I'm sorry, but I don't know. There are no good outcomes here, just bad and worse. Nor is there one answer for everyone in the world. My own country, Sri Lanka, has already fallen apart. I already know what it's like to go without fossil fuels, without electricity, and what it's like to see the rich throw the poor under the bus so they can party some more. What do you want me to tell you? Grow vegetables, dig a well, try and raise decent children, get right with the gods? There is no right answer, and there's certainly not one right answer for everyone. You're better off asking your neighbors and seeing how you can help them, not asking how you can help yourself. Accepting defeat, whatever that means, against nature is not an end to discussion, it's a start. It's the start of a process of grieving, which is different for everyone. One thing I can tell you is that people in the dirty South, where I'm from, don't even talk about climate change that much. We're already screwed, and future screwed is really a luxury good. As Vijay Prasad says, the climate justice movement is a movement that says we're worried about our future. But what future are we talking about? What future do children in the African continent, in Asia, in Latin America have? They don't have a future. They don't have a present. They're not worried about the future. They're worried about their present. Your slogan is, we're worried about the future, but again, what future? That slogan sounds like a middle-class bourgeois Western sentiment. It's important to shift our focus to the present. Consider this, 2.7 billion people can't eat right now, and yet the message is to reduce consumption. How does this message resonate with a child who hasn't eaten in days? It's crucial to gain awareness of this reality. This movement needs to recognize these disparities, otherwise it won't gain traction in the third world where people are struggling for their immediate survival. We must acknowledge the urgent issues faced by those who are most vulnerable. Again, a lot of this can be solved by breaking up all corporations, confiscating their wealth, and redistributing it to help people, not just give them food, but to help them grow their own food. And the breaking of the corporations would halt the destruction, right? The sucking of resources from these places. The oil companies, the mining companies, on and on and on. It would stop the wealth extraction, right? And you can actually just send that money and those resources to people who need it. And hopefully, take out the people who would keep that in their own pockets instead of redistributing it to others. I don't know how you do that one either, but maybe form new organizations. In my country, Sri Lanka, we ran out of fossil fuels for months and are now under a completely unelected president and IMF administration, starving our children and stripping our health care to just load us with more debt and make the stock market go up for one last stock jobbing swindle. Our children are getting protein maybe once a week. They're not preoccupied with their future slipping away when the present is already gone. I don't know what you do with this information. I think it's a particular quirk of Western democracies that people think they're in control of all these global things, that they need to have the right opinions about everything, when in fact they're just subject to the most unrelenting propaganda, which they are unrelentingly obnoxious about. People are told that they can fight climate change by buying the right products and having the right thoughts, and they're missing the point that we've already lost. As Carole King said, it's too late, baby. It's too late. Baby, it's too late. This might lead to grief and rage and gathering your meager possessions together as losers of wars, even metaphorical ones, traditionally do. But nobody wants that. They want to keep getting more but different possessions to have their climate and eat it too. This is actually the spirit that needs to be defeated, the spirit of beating nature, the rank defiance of old gods and new. The gods demand sacrifice, and they won't be pawned off with paper straws. The die is cast, the game is lost, all that's left is the cost. If that's defeatism, so be it. The battle is lost, all you have is your vanities to lose now. All right. It's a pretty good article. It took me a long time to read that. I hope you enjoyed it, though. Got a couple more things to cover today. I actually had another article to read. But before I do that, before I get into that, um, looks like there was a death at Burning Man. Officials investigate death at Burning Man as thousands surrounded by floods. It looks like they started letting people drive out, that it got dry enough for people to get out of there. Here's a interesting headline. We'll look at this for a second. From Paul Beckwith. The Army says 77% of Americans are too fat, mentally ill, on drugs, or more to join the military. USA, USA, USA. We're the best, right? We're producing the best and the brightest. Oh, no. 77% of young Americans too fat, mentally ill, on drugs, or more. I mean, it might actually make you wonder, if they had a draft, who would they draft? They're going to draft. If they brought back the draft, they would be drafting people that are unfit to serve. Which doesn't bode well, right, for any future hot wars or drafts that might come along with it. A Pentagon study revealed that 77% of young Americans do not qualify for military service without a waiver due to being overweight, drug use, or mental or physical problems. When considering youth disqualified for one reason alone, the most prevalent disqualification rates are overweight, 11%, drug and alcohol abuse, 8%, medical physical health, 7%. The Pentagon's 2020 qualified military available study of Americans between the ages of 17 and 24 read. Several key findings were noted in the summary of the report. For example, most ineligible youth, 44%, are disqualified for multiple reasons rather than in only one area. So combinations of all of these things. Being overweight was the highest. Anyways, concern over the shrinking pool of potential recruits has grown in recent years. Many factors that we are navigating through, such as the fact that the youth are more disconnected and disinterested compared to previous generations. Anyways, in case you cared about that. On one hand, it's not good that this is the state of our youth. On the other hand, if they're disinterested, I'm as disinterested as they are. So I've said this: F the military, and F, don't join the military. Stop joining the military. F joining the military. Don't encourage your children to join the military. Don't join the military yourself. F the military. They are only serving terrible purposes, and you are just a pawn in these terrible purposes, right? And a lot of people are getting screwed. They think they're joining the military to get something from it, and sometimes you do, but man, a lot of people get really screwed over. So it's not necessarily the thing that you think it is. Some people do all right, I guess. But I've seen a lot of people join the military and fail. A lot of people, a lot of my friends, it's really weird. I've seen, of my immediate circle of friends that joined the military, I've seen very few that have, excelled. A few people have excelled. The vast majority of them failed miserably. Either got out or were kicked out or had serious issues after they got out. Just telling you. It's not the thing that a lot of people think it is. All right, real quick, going to cover one or two more things. Before we get out of here, if you enjoy this channel, if you appreciate this channel and you want to support this channel, these are the best ways to do it. PayPal.me/Kevin Sandbloom, Venmo at Kevin Sandbloom, Cash App at Red Llama Music, buymeacoffee.com/BlackBearNews. You can also hit me with a super chat or a super ray. Patreon is also available if you want to support me on Patreon. Checking in. I will check in at the end of the show, see if I got any messages, donations, whatever. All right. Let's see. Give me 1 sec, guys. Give me one moment. All right. Still here. All right. I want to talk about this article before we go. I don't know how deeply I'm going to get. I don't have a lot of time to get deep in this, but we'll get the general idea of it. Subway stations, sewers, roads, bridges, transmission cables, and foundations are all designed with a tolerance level supercharged with carbon. Nature breaks our engineered world. Never forget that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of nature. And I like that premise. Global boiling, the polycrisis. This is from August 3rd. This looks to be longer than I can read in the next 10 minutes. This July has been the hottest in our recorded history and most likely over the last 120,000 years. 4 heat domes across the northern hemisphere over West Asia, North America, North Africa, and southern Europe contributed to soaring temperatures, not just breaking but shattering records by several degrees. High up in the Andes, winter has turned to a blazing summer. The sun has been blotted out by Canada's enormous fires. Together with deadly heat came unprecedented rains and flooding, most notably in Delhi and Beijing. It's not just the carbon cycle, but the water cycle that's been supercharged by fossil-fueled modernity. We should never have called it Earth. Ours is an oceanic planet, and most of the extra heat is being absorbed by oceans now hotter than ever before. Their warmed currents have meant that a Mexico-sized chunk of Antarctica failed to refreeze this year. Increased amounts of water vapor, itself a powerful greenhouse gas caused by warming on the planet, are in turn turbocharging the vast atmospheric heat engine, causing more extreme weather. Not for nothing has the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres declared a new era of global boiling. Looking closely at the chart below, July is more than 4 standard deviations outside the 1979 to 2000 mean. Amid the weather crisis, other records have been smashed too. The most air travel passengers in a single day in the U.S., the highest ever profits for European carriers IAG and Air France KLM, record oil consumption, and record coal production. Between climate extremes and record fossil fuel profits, political backlash to climate action by right-wing parties is gathering strength. Oh, indeedy do. Indeed it is. The climate change is a hoax crowd has never been more fashionable and never been more outspoken. When I was a graduate student in the 2010s, I was miserable about mass denial of the climate emergency. Global warming remained a fringe cause and an afterthought in national politics. In 2012, climate wasn't even mentioned in the final presidential debate between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. Remember those days? How could it? Polls had climate at the bottom of ranked concerns, with economy at the top. Of course. This decade is different. We are being battered by extraordinary events at an accelerating clip. And today's public is increasingly aware that we live in an omnicidal Anthropocene. That awareness, however, does not necessarily lead to action. On the contrary, there is a threat that the positive but partial developments in climate mitigation could perpetuate the delusion that present action is sufficient. While we have begun to shift marginal activities, new car purchases, new efficient buildings, to greener technologies, there remains a risk of discounting the extraordinary threat of the already accumulated carbon in the atmosphere. This comes down to a distinction between the flow and stock of carbon. The planet does not care about the annual rate of emissions, the flow. What matters is the accumulated stock of carbon in the atmosphere. That's what governs the degree of warming. The thousands of new articles during the pandemic wondering if a drop in emissions predicted a drop in temperatures exemplified the flow misconception. Climate is a stock, not a flow problem. Should be something that people are taught in schools. And it's not just lay people. A classic paper by John Sturman tested engineers and scientists at MIT and found that they, too, were clueless about stocks in their mental models of climate change. Adults' mental models of climate change violate conservation of matter. The correct mental model is a bathtub. As long as more is flowing from the tap, our emissions, into the tub, atmospheric stock of carbon, than is being drained by the sink, rainforests, oceans, and so on, the water level in the tub will keep rising. That is a perfect analogy. The past 5 years have been the hottest ever on record, as have 20 of the past 22. This consistent warming trend is a direct consequence of the rising water in the bathtub. It will only get worse as the stock of CO2 rises year on year. And also, when those sinks become sources, look out, then the bathtub overflows. And there's no draining it, right? The drain is clogged. Ignorance about the stock problem has corresponded to climate mitigation frameworks long dominated by gradualism. This sanguine orientation assumes that planetary instability is a problem that can be solved over the next few decades through making incremental changes to energy use. Powerful interests prefer deep cuts to carbon be completed far away in the discounted future, when we would, of course, all be richer. That motivated gradualism fed into policy tools implemented or merely proposed, like carbon pricing and energy transition pathways, and popularized by concepts like the McKinsey abatement cost curve. The consultants asked, what are the cheapest emissions to abate? The low-hanging fruit. Gradualism is rooted in heavily criticized cost-benefit models. Their logic sounds reasonable if we think that the problem is the rate of carbon emissions, and cutting the flow of emissions will reduce global warming. Michael Mann, this is not the case. The reason has to do with the stock logic of the greenhouse gas effect. In 2018, the gradualism started to lose its grip. That year, the IPCC special report on the impacts of a 1.5°C change to global temperature and the Hothouse Earth paper were published, and then a 15-year-old Greta Thunberg began leading student strikes for climate awareness every Friday. In India, here and now, in India, the Yamuna River broke its banks and flooded 3 water treatment plants. The Delhi state government warned that it would ration drinking water. Drought in Uruguay left more than half its population without safe tap water to drink. The government is providing people with bottled water as the situation is expected to last for months. Extremes put enormous stress on farms, power grids, ecosystems, and lives. Subway stations, sewers, roads, bridges, transmission cables, and foundations are all designed with a tolerance level supercharged with carbon. Nature breaks our engineered world. Never forget that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of nature. All these disasters spark talk of a new normal. That, too, is a form of denial. What we face is planetary instability and disruption of everyday life as burning carbon loads the climate dice so that it throws 6 after 6. Mark Blythe calls it a giant nonlinear outcome generator with wicked convexities. In plain English, there is no mean, there is no average, there is no return to normal. It's one-way traffic into the unknown. The Earth system is an angry beast that we are poking with a carbon stock stick. Burning oil and gushing cash, the oil and gas sector has seen record profits over the past 2 years, both in total and for individual companies. The IEA estimates a staggering $4,000 billion in profits were made. $4,000 billion were made by the entire industry last year compared to a typical annual estimates of $1,500 billion. The 5 biggest international oil companies alone reported a combined $199 billion in net profits in 2022. National oil companies profited the most. Saudi Aramco earned $161 billion. The use of these profits is revealing. In oil booms of the past, high prices consistently attracted financiers and producers to invest heavily in new capacity. Exploration continues despite the fact that no new resources can be exploited if we are to stay within the 1.5C limit. But in contrast to the last oil price boom, international companies have pledged smaller amounts of cash to drilling more polluting fuels, suggesting tacit acknowledgement by finance of the faltering prospects for oil and gas demand. Are they investing in green? No. Companies are responding defensively to a certain future of falling demand. The super majors are returning cash to shareholders at a furious pace. Petrostates, however, from Saudi Arabia to the Brazilian municipality of Marica, are diverting earnings towards diversifying away from a sunsetting industry. Today, rebuilding the world to be cleaner and more resilient will take vast amounts of physical effort and skilled manual work. Whatever your beliefs about it, or definition of economic growth, deindustrialization is not an option. Social democrats the world over share a correct diagnosis of the climate crisis. The wealthiest create CO2 through consumption, controlling production, and corralling democracy. The proposed solutions expanding the welfare state and expand the welfare state and build a big green state, create powerful enemies. That is the planetary impasse we find ourselves in. If the Inflation Reduction Act showed money on a new cohort of U.S. green, showering money on a new cohort of U.S. green industrial interests offers the possibility, not without risks and troubling geopolitical escalations, of green capitalism bridging the impasse, it will not. Some focus must be brought to bear on another stock. Billions of fossil-burning machines, engines, turbines, furnaces produce CO2 each day. A shock of the old is that we still live in the machine age of Victorians. The climate crisis requires rapid electrification. No, it does not. New ways and machines to move, heat, cool, melt, and make things. No. All those machines have to be made, financed, marketed, and installed. Do you think that's just going to continue the problem? I don't know if this author believes in this or not. They're just, describing what's going to happen, I'm sure. But that is just continuing on the growth path, the production, resource depletion, and emissions path, right? So none of this is going to solve the problem. I don't know. Just you all know that. We are very clearly in this process. The IEA estimates that decarbonization will require the amount of power transmission and distribution lines to double and almost triple by 2050. Jesus, dear Lord. Demand for grain-oriented electrical steel would have to double by 2030. Boom, boom, boom. So yeah, that's a big fat no. Cars are one illustration of the stocks and flows problem. There are 1 billion cars on the planet. Sales of internal combustion engine vehicles peaked 6 years ago, but emissions from road transport won't peak until 2029. The shift in the flows, sales towards EVs is already upending political constituencies and threatening international allegiances. Anyways, I think this is almost over. The future is now. Even catastrophes such as the blazing summer heat, still ravaging Europe, don't directly lead to action. A study found that heat waves in Europe last year killed over 61,000 people. Europe was supposed to be shocked into action after the infamous 2003 heat wave, which killed over 70,000 people, some say 300,000, and was the subject of one of the first climate event attribution studies. Without social movements, inaction dominates. Wealthy societies aren't protected, but they are complacent. The deranged idea, as Amitav Ghosh describes it, that we are safe, that things are under control, that bad things only happen to people who are far away, persists. Anticipating future ruin, we fail to act in the here and now. Community emergency services can help keep vulnerable elderly and infants cool. Governments can do more to cool people by opening air-conditioning public facilities. Air-conditioned public facilities. China has gone further, opening underground bomb shelters to citizens seeking to escape the heat. In Arizona, 31 days above 43 C or 110 Fahrenheit heat has led to a surge of deaths, and in a rerun of COVID, the government has resorted to extra trailer morgues. Creative adaptation is urgent. So is cutting the stocks of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is not the logic of costs and benefits, but of means and ends, not of economics, but survival. Okay. Hope you all enjoyed that, guys. I think that does it for me. I'm going to wrap up today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Before I leave out here, I'm going to see if I got any donations, messages, etc., etc. Victory Gin got me some coffees. Thank you, Victory Gin. I appreciate you. And I appreciate everybody who does support the show. There are many of you. You all know who you are. Checking on other places, platforms, ways, and means. Alrighty. I think that does it. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. See you tomorrow at the regular time of 12 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And until next time, peace.